Go ahead, Peter.
No, I mean, I think where we left off with the Orchard presentation was like, okay, the next meeting, we're going to talk about what we saw, our feelings about that, our reactions to it. And I think we went into the Orchard meeting. I mean, that was the goal anyway. The goal was to keep an open mind. Like, okay, so, you know, Sean brought this in. He said, as an option, he said, why don't we build on top of Orchard Core? And see, you know, if that's a viable option. Brought this guy in. So going into it with an open mind, of course, it was tough to see. I mean, that's my you know, my overall conclusion of it is it was tough to see how you could carry over existing DNN sites into the world of Orchard, even though it's not really well defined. You know, the whole DB setup is completely different, right? It's a document database, even though it didn't exclude relational database, but still, you know, you're completely putting the whole DAO on its side. The concept of installing modules was something that they had looked at, but they ditched because it turned out to be too difficult. So in the end, their current solution, their Orchard Core solution, for those that weren't present, by the way, required you to basically build every site out there, right? So you need Visual Studio to at least build it. You could still, I think, throw it over the wall then onto a server, but you had to kind of build your end solution. That's it, boom, and pump it out. What else? You know, I'm going over the negatives here. I mean, the positives I think are evident because it's already there. There's a tiny ecosystem, but you know, there's a couple of people there. And it's got, you know, it's embedded within Microsoft. So,
yeah, I think, you know, it's just important to note for anyone who hasn't caught up on the video that Orchard Core is really a development framework.
yeah.
And what they consider a module is not equivalent to a DNN module.
No.
What they consider a module is something that, you know, it can have a view, but it doesn't necessarily have a view as basically a plugin for a application. So if we
and also those modules would only be reached through a route, right? It had a very basic routing structure. It wasn't like you're going to give your modules to some end user and they are going to create a site sticking stuff and creating pages. It was more or less, you have a blog module, therefore your site will be /blog, and that would activate that module.
Well, I think that's the simple case. I mean, that was, I think, the more getting started that he was showing us, whereas I would assume at the Orchard CMS level, which we didn't really get into, that they are plugging into that same system and doing dynamic routing.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, Sebastian said one thing that they tried to do dynamic loading and discovered it was too hard. I mean, that's concerning, right? That Microsoft said the Microsoft ASP.NET Core team specifically said dynamic loading was too hard in .NET Core.
Yeah.
I believe there's a special thing to realize. I think they tried this more than a year ago. So I think they were much more limited in terms of the framework when they tried it. And I think at that time they just said, we have to prioritize, so we're gonna like not do this right now. It's probably easier now.
Yeah, maybe there's more of the reflection libraries and things.
Yeah, that was me missing completely in Core 1.
Mm.
And I think this wasn't, you cannot compare these modules, what they call modules, with our modules. Their modules are more what we have as providers or as backend components. Because, and for this, of course, dynamic loading would be possible. And for us, of course, it's a need, but I wouldn't say that it's not possible with a library.
It's more like extensions, right?
They want to make a developer framework, and if you don't need this extension, you simply exclude this library, part of the library, because you say, okay, I want to make it as small as possible and as fast as possible, and so that's the idea behind it.
So anyway, my coming away from that meeting, I thought that it's like the part that really struck home with me was the stacking of things, right? So having a core and the CMS modules loosely coupled on top of that, and build your system out with extensions. I think there are some ideas there that I'd love to see basically in DNN as well as we move forward. I think also we don't really have a choice, because if we ever want to migrate our current solution, we're probably going to have to do it step by step and start to decouple things rather than try to do it as one monolithic app. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to learn from Orchard Core and how they did that. Not necessarily direct code that we can import.
I think if you consider DNN correctly, and we currently do not have the separation, but if you really look at it, then you have one level of infrastructure with all the services behind, included, and on top you have the page model. There's a page, all this view and displays thing with its pages and modules and so on, which in my opinion we should separate very clearly. So we have the option, for example, to switch the display, because that's where we have this different client-side technologies and so on. Where we have, and I think that if we do it properly, then it would be much easier to handle instead of having one big stuff all mixed up.
Yeah. So the like 3-step roadmap that I don't know if I wrote it in the Slack channel or somewhere else, but I think that is slowly materializing out of this group, is a first phase where we implement a mechanism to allow developers to prepare themselves for the future, right? This is the whole Razor Pages thing. Then a second phase where you basically start to rework the middle layer of the app and the data access layer, everything that is not specifically the web forms page rendering, but just like the library, like users and roles and all that kind of stuff. And then a third phase where you finally tackle the whole page delivery mechanism, and that, because that would break basically you know, a lot of sites, because you've probably got a skinning engine to redo. I can't see that carry over very easily, but at least at that point the solution would be so mature that you would have built how should I say, enough momentum within the community, like, okay, you know, this is going to be good, we're going to, you know, go in that direction, and you know, we're going to stay on board. Is that how you guys as well see roughly the only viable migration path for the current DNN out of the swamp, or are there alternatives?
I think the idea would be building a new system, making it mature, allowing new sites to be built on it, making us getting firm with upgrade paths within this new version, and then finally, if it has a maturity and all the features that we need to migrate more complex sites, maybe it's a step-by-step approach, but then allow people to migrate from from current DNN framework to the new one.
Yeah.
For my idea, and for my regarding making the current framework easier to for the transmission, in my opinion, it would be good if you have some kind of settings framework like this liquid or this form builder stuff, where we had data types. and if you, with controls for display and view, and if we can implement this for settings for 90% of the settings, then it would be much easier for modules.
Right, right. But that would typically fit in that second phase, right, where you are attacking the API. You're saying, okay, what bits were very good about DNN? What do we keep, and what do we jettison? What do we add? And also to then kind of harmonize the API. Now, ideally, because what I'm trying to avoid, and I think that's why I think this migration path was emerging as well, is that we are forced to kind of do a parallel run of a new framework that will take years to develop, and thereby have resources depleted because they're kind of spread out across two different frameworks that we're working on. So I think there's a lot to gain if we can make it such that we can actually migrate within the current solution until a very last stage. Like I said, that phase 3 is going to be probably the most messy part, but the phase 2, I think, can be done within the current framework. In other words, you start to build out that new API in the current framework in a new DLL, and as time progresses, developers take a dependency on that rather than the new DLL and the other DLLs that we have, and then that stuff we can test for .NET Core compliance, so it will carry over to the new solution.
Yeah, I would assume that there are lots of interfaces will change, and that of course we learned a lot during the past 10 years.
Yeah.
And we can implement better structures, for example, for permissions, which are currently stored very inefficiently.
Yeah. But I mean that's all like getting into the details of exactly what we would change. I think that's obviously a really nice gift box to open and discuss. But I think if we have our kind of top level approach, going through those 3 phases clear. First of all, we can communicate that we intend to keep the current sites, right? So that we're not going to develop a new framework out of nowhere and confront everyone with that one day. And 2, that we are going to move to .NET Core, and this is going to be the path, right? And 3, potentially, I mean, that's what I'm hoping for, to get resources from Microsoft to join us in this effort, because I think they will want to see that commitment to that plan, let's say, to that very high level plan. I think we'd greatly benefit from having an architect from the ASP.NET team on board with us, but my guess is they're not going to join unless we kind of say, okay, this is the way we want to go, right? We want to go to .NET Core. We're phasing it this way, and can you please help us kind of how to build this stuff, like how to do this. And I'm pretty sure that is what Andy would be very happy with as well.
I doubt it will be possible to get full-time resources from Microsoft. As someone dedicated to DNN will be very difficult.
Yeah, but that's okay. That's conjecture. I mean,
helpful with specific stuff, and they agree on that, and they will maybe assist us with marketing and so on.
We'll see with respect to that, but I think it's worth a try, and and that we definitely need something like that, put it that way. I'm actually more optimistic than that. I think the signals we are getting is that Microsoft does not want these DNN sites to evaporate into thin air.
Can someone help me with a quick question? What was the best case scenario we hope for with Orchard? Can someone just
the best case scenario? I think the reason Sean brought it up was to find a way to .NET Core, right? It was a way to speed things up because it was a solution, a CMS already running on .NET Core by Microsoft people, etc. So why not leverage that, especially given that it was architected in this very decoupled way. So you could potentially imagine that DNN could be just a shell on top of that Orchard core. That was the rationale anyway.
Yeah, so we didn't give too much consideration to, what specific features and all that kind of stuff. The architecture was pretty much it.
Yes, exactly. And we did say though that like at a very abstract level that Orchard would be able to help because it did have the concept of multi-tenant solution and of extensibility through modules and whatnot. So a number of concepts carried over. So like, okay, well maybe we should look at this in more detail.
Okay. The reason for my question is I was just thinking, if we are trying to figure out a direction to go, it would behoove us to look at the best ones that are out there on other stacks, except for WordPress, of course. But what are the real best of breed ones out there, and what architectures do they follow, and can we find some parallels? And perhaps, and in fact, if there's a really good one out there that's really popular, why don't we clone it in .NET?
But
Core.
Yeah, that is assuming that our current framework is not let's say working very well. And I would contend that no, actually everyone's quite happy with the overall approach of DNN, like the inline editing, the portals, the concept of portals pages, and the fact that end users can do certain things. And the approach until now has been more like, okay, well, let's make sure we preserve that core, what makes DNN, rather than take one step back and say, okay, how would we redo a CMS? Which I think is a much more difficult proposition, because then all of a sudden you're going to step into the market as a completely new entity.
Sure, yeah, no, I'm not advocating that, but I also feel like whatever decisions we make, we need to be thinking in, as Wayne Gretzky says, where the puck is going to be. It's like a long-term decision. So we need to think through, is whatever we are going to build, whatever we are going to put effort into, going to be resilient and last us, the next 5 years or 8 years or whatever,
But my fear and my gut feeling is that brings out such a gigantic acrimonious discussion in our community, given that everyone, for everyone, DNN means something else.
Yeah.
And, put it this way, like over the years, we've been discussing if we have control of the framework, what would we do? And very quickly you find out that there are very dominant characters in the community that all have their own kind of direction on this, and they don't mesh very well, all these things.
Sure, but that's our job as a team to come up with a set of recommendations that take things into account, right? I mean, I just feel like we should be cognizant that whatever we are doing, it needs to last long, because the whole point is we don't want it to become irrelevant, right? Whatever we do, we have that risk, and we don't want that. We want to avoid and, in fact, jump ahead of the curve.
Right. But I have we get quite a bit of feedback from the community about what they like about DNN, right? Because you need to only suggest to remove one feature, and you will draw out everyone that is really attached to that feature. Like, no, wait, my customers use that. I love that. That's the part that I got DNN for. And we, that's been tried countless times. And in fact, and I say this, and it's a bit of a running joke between me and Benoit from the French community. It's like there's so many people who leave our community throwing the door behind them like, boom, and I'm never coming back. You guys suck. It's like you never moved to .NET Core. You're just sitting on your hands. And then a few months later, you look behind you and they're back in the room. And you go up to them and you go like, So what happened? I was like, yeah, well, I checked out outside. There's nothing better. So
Yeah, sometimes you have to look at the greater good, and over individual preferences. What is the greater good? What is best for?
No,
I think,
I definitely have, and I think that's something that I want to discuss as well, also at DNN Connect, by the way. But to go over markets, like what markets are we serving, like where do we feel strong, and what do these markets want, where are they going, and because I felt that the whole so the DNN Corp and Evoke period, so what I call DNN V2. Was slightly, was misguided. They went into the enterprise market, and that was their prerogative. I mean, after all, they were in charge of the platform; they could take it wherever they wanted. But they're going to chase the big companies. And now we're into V3, and because that didn't really happen, right? That never came to a huge success. And most of us from V1 were very, very strong in the small and medium enterprise market. And for me, I think that is a great discussion to have, is like, if we, focus again on our core customer group, like what exactly is it that we are using as a tool? What tooling in DNN is that what delivers the real value to those customers? And I think I have those discussions daily with other DNNers, like oh, this really works very well for my customers. I you realize there's preciously little you can rip out before you start to kind of change its character and what it does for these people.
I would like to suggest, this is something that's been going through my head for a while, and because I'm very fan of the slow migration model, because I'm sure we will lose a lot of people if we take a fast migration. I'm just going to put this in the room, not because I think it's the best solution, but because I think it might be a viable way. And that is, if we would consider to provide let's say a development model, which actually takes headless as an intermediate step. The core idea is a little bit this. I'm just trying to phrase it without preparing a PowerPoint first. What if there were like an output engine that would know what a page is, that would know what the structure is, that could just put things in it? There would be a reduced API for reading data, not writing, because again, mixing those things up makes APIs very complicated. Because trivially speaking, if there was just an output engine rendering a page and rendering the right parts in it, and then a certain API to allow people to put buttons in the right place, and then everything else in a web API, that would be I would say, a possible intermediate step, because you could say, okay, anything that wants to run on that new, fast, modern engine has to be, let's say, Razor or whatever, because that's the only thing that will work there. You could also kind of force people to use Web API for most of their interactions, which is also the way ahead. And what is not to be forgotten is it's easy to write .NET Core code today running on .NET 4.6 plus, etc. It's not a big deal. You can then create components which only use libraries from .NET Core. And then we've been doing that for a while. And that would kind of like say, okay, make your web APIs using these and these .NET Core conventions, create your output engines using these and these conventions. And it would like produce a very slim stack, and basically everything you would be doing there would almost already be .NET Core. And there's a few things to solve, but basically the .NET DNN UI is today JavaScript anyways, right? So also that running it beside a page that was not web forms would work.
Yeah. And I think that fits very well with the whole phase one approach, right? It's like, make sure you get an engine that will be, let's say, so lean and tailored to a future solution that will definitely carry over. But I mean, coming back to markets, I think that there's there's a couple of things that are happening. So AI, Andrew is naming AI as a big discipline. I'm someone who dabbles in IoT quite a bit. And I also intend to elaborate on that at DNN Connect a little bit as well, because this is something I don't know if any of you guys recognize this, but if you delve into IoT and home automation, you realize that these guys know a lot about electronics, but they know fuck all about CMSs and programming. And oddly enough, they dabble in this, right? So they create some mechanism to, for instance, home automation. If you go to, I'll post a link here, openhab.org. I believe it's called openhab.org. Let me just check that, openhab.org. There we are. And they, this is one of the more popular frameworks out there for home automation. Now, I can give a demo of how you configure one of these things, but let me tell you, if you don't have a PhD in programming and are a Linux adept, then it's not going to be your cup of tea. So again, going through that experience, I was like, man, there is so much easy terrain for us to also cover, right, with DNN out there, because this is screaming for a CMS approach to these kind of solutions. Frankly, I don't think it really means that we need to do anything very differently, but I think we can, add bits and pieces that mesh better with IoT, probably with AI as well, and thereby, open doors. IoT loves the concept of message buses, for instance, and if we can get a message bus solution inside of DNN, that would almost certainly open the door to a lot of IoT solutions. So yeah, that's my thought about, are there markets that might be of interest to DNN, in the next 5 years, Nick?
Well, why would an IoT vendor look at DNN? Or why would they not build it using Electron?
Because what I've seen until now is that what they need to do is either build something completely on their own, like the solutions out there are pretty low level, like you need programming knowledge, and the IoT people out there, if you look at all the YouTube videos that I go through to solve something, like I need to couple this ESP8266 to this thermometer, for instance, and how do you do that? And then you see the code of the guys, and the code just sucks. And you're like, okay, well, the guy is really great with electronics, but the coding is not their domain.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we provide the benefit, by making that easy, simple, by making it powerful. Like, you can make something look nice very quickly, and it's not very hard to program our platform.
Exactly. One of the main benefits of DNN, if you can consider the first years, was that you could have minimal effort to get your special need being implemented.
Yeah.
You have the framework on top with all the permission, with all the page rendering and so on. You may concentrate just on your problem. And I think that's something we should try to achieve with a new solution as well. We should provide as much building blocks as possible. We should provide a good framework around this specific solution. And for example, a block module developer should focus on a block module. You should not be need to focus on user management, on how to place it on a page.
Yeah. So Nick, Node-RED is indeed one of my favorite tools here as well. I mean, Node-RED sits there as a kind of how should I say? You're not going to redo Node-RED. It's a fantastically supported, great, powerful entity in the IoT sphere. What I was thinking about is the following. Let's say you have small, medium enterprise, a small company, and it has, issues of stock. Like you want to help out with them managing a stock. And nowadays with IoT, we get more options electronically to help out, like with RFID tags and, or with barcodes. You walk over there, you grab your mobile phone, or you've got this little scanner in your hand, you go boom. Now, and then that magically couples to DNN to make sure that, hey, this arrived, etc. I think those are the kind of applications that are, if I'm guessing about the IoT market in small medium enterprise, this is something that is currently underway, right? This is where IoT is making an impact in small companies, because these solutions don't cost enterprise dollars anymore. You can make this just by ordering some stuff from China off eBay for a couple of $100. You've got this whole system rigged for this guy that's got a woodworking shop, and now all of a sudden everything is almost fully automated. And that is, I think that for me is a little bit like the early days when we were doing CMSs, when CMSs were still new, right? So this was still relatively new to those mom and pop shops. Like, oh, a CMS. Yeah, because then you can get like customer feedback and all this kind of stuff. And we opened those doors for them back in the day.
I think if you architect something in small bite-sized components, in the future, it's easier to change those components. I mean, I like the idea of having a rendering engine that's separate, and that's a good idea. That might be something that, that's one more thing towards this intermediary step, where if we can get the Razor pages in there, and then we have a rendering engine, like Daniel suggested, and then people start moving their modules over, and maybe we can start architecting some of the things more in like a microservices style, where we could scale up the reading on the API side versus writing the database and things like that.
Yeah, and
separate those components, and that it's all single responsibility.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was hoping that maybe someone from Microsoft might help us kind of decouple a couple of these things to make the task of this whole migration more manageable for us.
Yeah, because if you looked at what they did in Orchard for modules, like everything was their own little plugin / module, right? They built a little framework and they said, okay, we need email. Well, that's just an individual component that's a module. And, you need whatever else, just a quick setting. That was its own little component of the module.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the biggest, Peter asked before, what is a big advantage of DNN? And I think one of the biggest advantage is this module packaging and the option just added in if you need it. There might be a difference so that we say, okay, we might have an environment where we say, okay, you select the component and you build it, and then, for example, in a Azure environment, you are not allowed to do it dynamically, but you have a staging environment where you prepare your site, and then it might be faster than the current approach. But that's would be a second step. But even with what Orchard is doing, if they add references, adding a reference is not more than just changing a config file, in my opinion, and adding some code into your solution, right?
Right. And frankly, I think the delivery mechanism could still be improved upon by having our own kind of package management system that could be activated through prompt, right? So prompt install this or that module, and it's kind of done. I think there are very exciting things we can do now to the platform, and we're beginning to architect it as well as a core with a CMS on top, right? I think prompt was also a step in that direction anyway for me. Anyway.
So what is our timeline for having some decisions made and start doing action? We can have many calls like this.
Exactly. No, I mean, for me, it's like I would love to, and I might even jump the gun if it doesn't happen before DNN Connect, because I think by DNN Connect, we should have, as we say in Dutch, the nose is pointing in the same direction. Also, it's the next opportunity to address a room full of people with an enthusiastic story about where we're going to go. And also, it's the opportunity to maybe get someone from Microsoft to come over, because they do every year. And if we get the right person, I think that would be, for me, that's the deadline I'm working towards. Right?
Yeah. So then we need to work backwards from that deadline and figure out what needs to happen when, because I don't think there's that much time.
No, we have 2 months roughly, and it's for me. I think it's within this group to have agreement on that kind of top level plan. Like, okay, this is how we do it, and then slowly begin to make that more concrete enough for people to actually to believe that is feasible. Then I am going to go to Microsoft. Some other people I know are talking to Microsoft as well right now, to see how they would fit in, and then bring that to Andy and say, okay, well, this is what we intend to do.
So then can we break up all the major decisions that need to be made into chunks, and let's, as a team, just start voting and then consolidate those votes and have a discussion and make actionable decisions?
I'm all for that.
All right, so
let's vote.
I guess we need to maybe have a Google Doc or something where we start outlining. Is everybody there?
Yeah, we definitely do.
I'm not sure if you're seeing the chat thread here. Matt Rutledge has created a document that he's.
Oh, you did already. All right, great.
With some options, but I mean, if you want to cast a vote or something. Also, Mitchell has joined the call, and I know Mitchell had some combos at MVP Summit, things like that. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the direction that we go here, we do need to try to get alignment with Microsoft if we can, regardless of the alignment that we get out of ESW. Right? If we can get aligned with Microsoft and get Microsoft backing, that should really help us get some energy. I have yet to successfully get a follow-up with Scott Hunter from my conversation at MVP Summit. I did follow up with him after that conversation. I did send a secondary follow-up the tail end of last week. If I have not heard something by the end of the day tomorrow, I'm going to send another follow-up, probably copying in a few other Microsoft people, most likely thinking about whether or not whether or not we're going to get some answers and that kind of thing. So, for me, I want to see that direction. And I don't know if this got talked about before I joined today, but I do think that we have a bigger problem than vNext right now to deal with, and that is kind of calming the current scenario and figuring out what 9.3 looks like, or what that means for us in terms of action, because I'm definitely sensing some stuff there too. I know it's not directly vNext, but if everybody gets angry and starts leaving, there's not going to be anybody there for vNext. So I think that we really should try to loop, at least into whatever decisions we're making here, a consideration of how do we support the current platform, or what is the level of care that the community, because a lot of the people that are in this group that would be contributing to vNext would also be the people that would need to contribute to, the care, feeding, and stabilization, if you will, of the current platform. And I just want to make sure that we're there. Because I think from my perspective, all of our ideas are grand. And I think we do need to get a decision. But then I also think that we need to be very realistic in terms of the number of resources that we have available. If we don't have resources from ESW, does that change what route we go? Does that change the amount of time
For me,
that we
it
can
depends.
contribute? And I think that,
Yeah, for me, that depends if Microsoft is on board.
I mean, and getting Microsoft on board, you know, I don't want to belittle the value in Microsoft, but I think at most we're going to get some architecture guidance. We are not going to get bodies from Microsoft.
No, but I think, but if we have architecture guidance, I think it's much easier to get people to commit work to the platform.
Right.
It's
and I just think that unfortunately
that the work is not going to be wasted.
Right. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is we're at a real live chicken and egg scenario, right? We have an opportunity. We do need to seize it. We need to move forward, but there are a couple things that I think would completely change the paradigm of what we do until we get them answered. And that's the part of this that I don't know how to clear that roadblock aside from continuing to do what we're doing, which is, you know, trying to rustle some thoughts from Microsoft, trying to rustle some thoughts from ESW. And maybe that's even as far as that we have to come up with a plan A, assuming ESW gives us a sizable amount of resources, and a plan B if they don't.
Yeah, no, and frankly, I think that if, like with the architecture guidance is there, what it would mean if ESW does not join the project for me is that it would just take longer. But the commitment, the fact that we do have a new head architect who thoroughly understands the technology and who's going to be able to give us this guidance, I think provides for many of us the missing motivational step to start helping building out a new API.
In any case, we need those are questions which needs to be answered before we can start. Because we need to make plans, we need to make some kind of promises or estimations at least. Because if we want to keep the community trusting us, then of course we need to come with at least some milestones or something. Or an envision at least.
Yeah.
Because lots of people are frustrated currently, of course.
Yeah. But anyway, as I'm writing out on the document, actually, what I was suggesting, I'm realizing that, I mean, this is basically the way that they did the redoing of .NET. Right? It was a gradual process. The only thing different from what I'm trying to do is to still keep it within the main development branch of DNN itself. But I don't think anyone can expect us to kind of throw the switch and come out with a complete new API, sorry, from one day to the next. I think that takes time to build out.
I think one of the core challenges is that basically a lot of effort needs to be invested before a first person actually benefits. And I think that makes it very, very hard for an open source team to do it, because basically none of us can commit to half a year's of work or something at a high level before even getting any benefit out of it. I mean, it's typical. If you just create a small component, it's like, you know, okay, I'm going to invest a few nights and I'm going to have something running, and then you kind of do it and you just start. And if we're honest, by the end, by the time we're done, we've probably invested a lot of time anyways. But it always feels the next step is like, it's a size that you can handle. And at the moment, I think one of the core problems is it's a very, very big step. And it feels like if we take the wrong one, we're going to lose all the time we invested because it's going to go in a different direction.
I think the first time is to get familiar with .NET, at least for those who are not with .NET Core, for those who are not who haven't worked with it yet, and of course someone needs to get to check the Orchard library or the Orchard core, whether it really is provides us with some benefit, would it make sense to utilize it, build on top of it, or start or omit it and build our own library on top of DNN. I don't know. I haven't had a look at it. Someone has to evaluate, in my opinion. Someone who already is familiar with .NET Core, ideally, or wants to become. Didn't .NET DNN Core had a first mock-up of a DNN.NET already built? Someone, was it Charles, or who did something like this? I think it was .NET Core 1.
There was something a long time ago of a potential .NET Core thing, but I don't think that ever was really fleshed out to more than a random idea, unless I'm not remembering correctly.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I just know that they created something, but I have. It has never been shown publicly, as far as I know. Yeah,
I know, because I know that Sean had mentioned something about that a long time ago. Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think the real key is we have to know what thing we're going to put our effort on. And with being able to put that effort on that thing, that I think gives us what we need to be able to kind of say, okay, we're not wasting our time. And for me, I guess that's the piece that I need to see before I can say, you know what, I'm going to go spend, 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week on contributing here, because there is that risk of it turning into nothing is, I think, our biggest limiting factor, at least for myself. And I just don't think we can answer that question yet until we get something from Microsoft or we get something from ESW. So I'm at a real crossroads in terms of how we get those answers, other than to keep hounding these people.
I think it's up to us to first come up with something more concrete. If we expect decision makers to make a decision, they need something concrete to sink their teeth into and say, yeah, this is actionable. But if you go with the vagueness that we have right now, the answer is always going to be no, nothing, $0.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I would do if I was an executive who had to make a decision. Like, what am I paying for? I don't know. Okay, well, then the answer is $0. Yeah.
We need to come up with a roadmap. We need to come up with at least some proof of concept, and otherwise, no one would give us money.
Yeah, it's a negotiation, and for every negotiation, you need a starting point.
No one from the community would be willing to contribute effort as well.
So, I just added it to that Google Doc, but obviously, if once there's movement on this or some momentum for this, I'd be perfectly happy to work this out in its own document in more detail, how I think it would work. But yeah, I don't think we should waste another 2 months going over the various options and weighing those.
Yeah.
I have a kind of a different question. Is there something like a next step that we could all agree on, which wouldn't necessarily contain the entire roadmap yet? But I mean, the main thing is we're all worried about investing time and then it being thrown away, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we would be able to agree on, okay, there's this one next step, and no matter which strategy we're going to go for, that's an important step, then that at least helps us to like think in steps where you always generate value without going too far.
So I was kind of asking a question about that last week with the Razor Pages module platform for the current DNN platform. And
Yep.
I've already invested a lot of time on that. And if we're not going to go that direction, you know, to kind of piggyback off what we're saying, I really shouldn't invest any more time on it. But I'm getting the impression from the majority of the people in this group that that's a good idea. We should do that because it's in .NET Core. And it will be supported regardless if we use Orchard or our own version of vNext. And if we're all in agreement of that, you know, myself and a couple other people have been helping me with that. We can bust that out and get a pull request submitted to platform to get that ready.
Right. I think you touched exactly the core of the issue there, Andrew. You said, look, if there's no commitment at a higher level that this is going to be used, I don't see the point in devoting more weekends of my time into tuning this. At some point, you want to have some kind of assurance that we're actually going to go this way. And I'm totally on board with that. That's why I think we should have this discussion that we're having now in this meeting.
Yeah, I think that the one thing we can all agree on is that we want it to be a stepped approach some way.
Yeah.
We all think that Razor Pages is a viable step in that approach, possibly even the next step. We think that possibly this rendering engine ideal might work as well. We know that we need to do some work on the API. So I think if you look at what's in this document online, there's a lot of overlap between most of the options. We're between basically where we go Razor Pages and then a new rendering engine for the views itself, and then what Peter's just added with the 3-stage process to .NET Core.
Because I think that at the end of the day, the decision makers, people like Andy, etc., are not overly concerned about exactly how the how those Razor Pages solution is architected. I think what he's looking for is indeed that kind of high level roadmap, and similarly towards Microsoft, that would be the same. And I guess I'm looking at you, Nick, because you provoked some of these thoughts as well, and you have more experience with that. I think that is how other decision makers would look at it as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you're going to make a strategic decision about something, you need to have all the information about it in front of you to make a decision, right? So it doesn't have to be at the 1,000 foot level. It needs to be at the 25,000 foot level. We need to work out the 1,000 foot level after the fact. But
exactly.
Before we dive too deep, we need to just figure out the big parts, make the big decisions. And that way we can set loose, like we've been discussing here. If there are certain areas that are a given, it's 100% going to happen. And let's start working on that already, even as we await decisions, on the broader thing.
Yeah.
And I think there are multiple areas we have to look at. For example, for the library, one approach could be that we look at the DNN library and check whether we can port it easily to .NET Standard. Because if it's possible with small enhancements to run on .NET Standard, it will run on .NET Core.
No, but yeah, that's exactly where I think that's where we will differ in opinion, because I think the .NET Core, the .NET Nuke DLL has 15 years of history in it. And at every turn as a programmer, you notice this, because there are so many different design patterns in there that it's freaking impossible to explain to someone how to create a module using that library. So I think actually the greatest opportunity, which is in phase 2, to redo the API or harmonize the API, as I like to call it, is you take the best bits from that library. It's like, okay, you know, we really want to preserve, for instance, I don't know, token replace, something that you're very familiar with. If we want to preserve that, okay, fine. You know, we carry that over. Probably doesn't need much work, etc. But there are other parts where you say, well, you know, user management. Geez, we've got a user controller, we've got a user provider, and we've got, you know, a user repository or something. Like, what the fuck are we going to choose, right? Choose for one pattern that we carry forward, and the others will be left behind in the old DLL. That way, we can finally get something that I can explain to other developers, like, oh, this is how you do stuff.
Peter, I just wanted to elaborate on something that you mentioned that I don't think I feel like I've talked with a handful of people in this room, but I just wanted to dive a little bit deeper on the phase 1 of the project. Again, if we do go down that Razor Pages or whatever that approach is of building something into DNN platforms that developers go, right now with the different module platforms, you just mentioned, we can go in 100 different ways to solve the exact same problem. And when we build that new platform, as it matures, we will define what those APIs are that are available to a module developer that's abstracted away. And then when we implement phase 2, those implementations will be choosing the best pieces from DNN and moving those over. So if there's 3 ways to do something in DNN platform right now, we might pick that best one and choose that as the implementation for that phase 2 of the project. And that's something I just wanted to highlight a little bit more in detail. As far as module platform, we need to make sure we abstract it away so the module developers are still focusing on the same API.
Yeah, I think, although I think it's a very noble idea, I don't think it's actually realistic, because it means that no one will be able to develop in what you propose is that we don't have any dependencies other than the dependencies that you just created inside of your pattern. And from experience, any idea that any one of us has for a great API for modules, like, it takes a week for someone to come back to you and say, by the way, I need this, and you didn't put it in there. So you know, and that basically sucks. We want to get people as quickly as possible into this Razor Pages engine. So you know, ideally, the way I think the only way it could work is when you say, well, you can still have your old dependencies on the old bits of the framework that are relevant. Let's say, you know, get the user info, you know, what the shape is of a user info. It's a bit of a messy object, but, you know, it's there, right? It works right now. So we're not gonna in the first phase kill that and replace it with a new user object that we feel is a much more harmonized version of it. Instead, we're focusing on a delivery mechanism for a module right now, and we tackle a few other things. And slowly but surely, we move these things into the, you know, that's the phase 2 I was talking about. We move and harmonize these things. So all of a sudden, that user info object goes to the background, and we introduce this new user info, or user object, for instance. And that sits in the new library. It conforms to the naming conventions of how we're going to redesign stuff. But it allows us to take time over this, because I can promise you, the minute you touch anything in the API, there's going to be a whole acrimonious reaction to that from developers. So, you know, don't underestimate how violent things can get when it comes to, you know, people's pet peeves in developing on DNN. So that's why I'm saying, let's see if we can, just like MVC, it was a new mechanism to deliver stuff like the MVC module pattern. And do it so smart that we can slowly move in all that stuff after the fact, and we don't need to have that from day one complete and defined.
But Peter, I think regarding the library, for example, we need to at some point we need to make the decision whether we want to port the old one or whether we want to use the one. For example, if we say we want to use the Orchard library, that would be something totally different. And as far as I understood Sebastian last week, they tried to be as near as possible at the .NET Core itself, so make it easier for new developers, of course not for our old module developers, but for new developers who are already used .NET Core a bit. That for them it should be easier to get into it. So the question is what are our target group and who do we want to please with our approaches?
Yeah, I think for me it's absolutely obvious that the .NET Nuke.dll, the .NET Nuke library project, is destined to die. The system.web runs through a whole bunch of classes, and like I said before, it's such a friggin' mess after 15 years that there's no way that's going to carry over to .NET Core, and you're going to be able to sell that to new developers. So,
I mean, port and of course clean up, like you said, but yeah. Based on the old one, or try a totally new approach. That's would be.
Well, that's. I think that's why the best approach is not to, because I think you're not seeing it the way I was seeing it, which is you're talking about porting over and then changing it. I'm saying leave it as it is, but build out a new library, so that as a module developer you can take your dependency on both and use the new bits that are nice and juicy and have come out and are really powerful. But if you, for instance, let's say we don't have token replace in there, right, in the new library, you can still take a dependency on the old library, right? You can still take a dependency on both of those libraries and have your module work. But the DAL, for instance, might be one of the first things that will shift, right? So the old library would all of a sudden take a dependency on that new library and say, okay, well, for the DAL now we talk to this. And if you want to go to the DAL, by the way, as a module, you will also be routed to this. And that way, I think, and then we will arrive at someday, we'll arrive at the moment that we say, okay, now that .NET Nuke.dll is being kind of hollowed out, all the nice bits have moved out to the new thing, and now we can ditch it. We can say, okay, well, version 15 is the end of .NET Nuke.dll, and we're done with it.
Would it be tough because I would like I see a lot of improvement necessary for the database as well, for the data structure.
Absolutely.
Of course, that needs to be the beginning, and then you need to you can put on top even if you want to keep the .NET Nuke.dll. But I'm not sure, because module developers will have to redo their modules anyway for the new DNN, and so
yeah.
They?
But the important thing is that they don't need to do that from one day to the next. They can do this gradually. And I think that you touch it's a great subject there, the data access layer. The way Orchard went, and I think that's the interesting parts as well to preserve from their approach, is they broke it down into a whole bunch of different libraries, right? They broke everything down into granular things, and that's the way that Microsoft was going with this .NET Core as well for a while, and then you group them together into kind of like, okay, if you want a dependency on regular module development core, boom, this is what you get. And but you could totally see that sitting in its own kind of entity and have its own responsible people for that entity within the framework. But it would be created, from scratch, because it's a new approach, and slowly hollow out the, ideally have the .NET Nuke.dll point to those new methods and say, okay, by the way, we're deprecating these and these bits in the .NET Nuke.dll. They're now pointing to the new thing, and the new thing is more efficient, etc. So as a module developer, if you want to benefit from these new gains, you will take a dependency for that part on the new one.
I would even start with a smaller approach and say, okay, we have a new, we start with a DNN next, and this DNN next first has a lot of less API included, because we think, and we will add things over time, but in the first time.
No, but then we lose a lot of people, because the problem is, if we have two different platforms to maintain, no one's going to use that new platform. Right? No one's going to go onto that until it's viable. It's basically what my own approach to .NET Core has always been. Well, you know, if it's something like, I don't know, a tiny project that I need to do somewhere, and it seems to fit, maybe it's interesting to have a look at it. But other than that, for production work, for my real work, no way, I'm not going there. I need something that works. And
anything fast, it might be. I think a lot of people will use it, because that's one of the complaints they currently have with DNN.
Anyway, my approach was, or one of my goals was to make it gradual and not sudden.
I'm fully on Peter's side here. I also know other content management frameworks that tried to do a breaking change. I mean, a big one, including Typo 3, for example, and it was basically, let's say, more or less a failure. What kind of happened is nobody started using the new stuff because it wasn't as good enough, and of course that means basically there was a new team that was very motivated, but after about a year or two they kind of lost the drive, because of course nobody was even touching it. It was just not good enough, and everybody was missing just that one more feature. And so in other words, if anything that is like a complete new thing will have no adoption and no support, and nobody will be working on it. And so I'm totally in favor of this. Create a additional library, and for a while actually the mess gets bigger. That is the reality, because people will be using the new library, and for anything where something's missing they'll be using the old library. Yeah. But at least they can continue to work, and they can still deliver whatever they promised to their boss on time.
Right.
And if it means that, yes, a year down the road, they're going to invest another 2 weeks, then they actually do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I mean, for the end users, nothing will change, right? That's the important thing. Like, the end users won't notice all this stuff happening between, you know, underneath. And that's what people really passionately care about. And frankly, you know, with the presentation that we saw last week, I wouldn't put all my money on Orchard Core, because there is no migration path from the old Orchard to the new Orchard Core, and I still have to see that happen, frankly.
I gotta run. I'm sorry. I just chatted with Clint briefly. If you guys are okay with it, I can get a few people together and start building out like a document that we can you know, have categories, subcategories, and start voting on things, so we can get to some actionable things quickly.
Yes.
So I can work with Clint and a couple others, whoever wants to volunteer on that, to get one out there as a starting point. Then we can discuss it and go.
Let me know.
Yeah.
Let me know
Drop
what
the link on Slack and.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my thing here. I mean, the conversation's all great, but we've got to get into actionable items at some point and subdivide into teams, and, you know, make a game plan and try to conquer and start communicating outwardly decisions. So, but thanks, Nick. I'll share that link. Appreciate you joining today.
Thank you, guys. Have a good day. Bye.
All right, Nick. Thanks a lot. All right.
So Peter, in your mind, how can we, you know, move forward? I mean, is the group, and I guess that's this document Nick has created, which I'll share a link here in a little bit. Yeah. It's like basically listing out, you know, letting people vote on what they want to do. As far as the route that, you know, we want to take, and obviously our entire group isn't here. So, you know, for me, I'm just trying to figure out, and I think we're all like, you know, wanting to make progress and track.
Yeah, I think the way I see it in more.
How can we make
progress on that?
Yeah.
You know, the way I see it is as follows. I think we need Microsoft's help to go from the, you know, 25,000 feet thing that I just described down to the, let's say, 10,000 feet level, right? That's where I would like to have input from Microsoft, right? And say, okay, this is the way we're going to have our components work together in the future, because this is basically the movement that, you know, Orchard went from Orchard 1 to this Orchard Core plus Orchard CMS. Now, I think that is inspiring, and we are more or less interested in doing a similar kind of movement. What I've described doesn't touch that yet, right? It's saying, okay, well, let's first tackle the module development pattern, then let's do the API and everything that sits in between, and then finally let's tackle the page rendering, the page delivery, the rendering method, right? Like how stuff gets put over the pipeline, and so all the system web dependencies, if you like. And I think that's all. It serves the purpose of having a focal point. I think that 25,000 feet kind of approach, like okay, this is we can all agree on that kind of movement. But an architect would need to sit down. It's like, okay, well, if you know, I would break it down into components X, Y, and Z, and these are the dependencies between these components, right? I'm kind of at the moment struggling with exactly how these components would match together to create the solution. But once that's clear, then all of a sudden the road is really open in front of us, because all of a sudden, you know, someone like Sebastian, for instance, would jump in and say, oh, by the way, you know, that the DAL thing, I'm really interested in that. So, you know, let me make a proposal for that, come back to the group, etc. And at some point, you know, given the reins, like, okay, well, off you go. You know, that is going to be done.
Yeah, because I think we have a lot of people who are ready to put energy into, you know, certain areas.
Yeah. But like you said, if there's like Andrew said, you know, if at some point there's not agreement on that 25,000 feet level, yeah, then you know, you're hesitant. And frankly, we're all in the same boat there. I don't want to devote countless hours programming on something that I don't know if it's going to be ditched one day. I want to have that agreement. And for that, I think for the agreement, part of it is us, like, okay, between us, like we agree on this. We know we are leading currently. So that's the great feeling we have with this group. It's like, okay, if we propose something, it's going to be taken seriously. And chances are, you know, management will agree with this. But then, you know, to have Microsoft actually, like Mitch said, you know, have architectural resources from Microsoft help us out with that translation, and then be able to go to Andy and say, by the way, you know, I think we've found our path, and this is going to be the path now at a 10,000 feet level. Now we're going to start translating stuff down to 1,000 feet. But that actually is where ESW could play a role. So at that point, Andy is going to come back and hopefully, you know, say, okay, we can do these and these and these bits. But you guys are going to have to do, I don't know, the design for this component, for instance, and then I'll throw that over the wall and have our guys program it. But it becomes much more tangible than instead looking at this gargantuan API that we have and say, oh, you know, I want to do this. I want to, you know, plucking stuff out of there and beginning to pull stuff, because everything is fucking connected, right? It's like a big game of Mikado. You take one little stick and everything starts to move. So unless we have that 10,000 feet kind of plan, it's kind of pointless to sink your teeth into one specific bit, in my opinion.
Gotcha. So, and I just emailed out the invite to you guys for the sheet that Nick created. So Peter, I guess your take is that, you know, we need to kind of get a little bit of high level assistance as far as architectural, you know, guidance from Microsoft before we start doing anything. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. Before we start, well, I mean, you obviously, no, ideas are cheap or free, right? If you have a great idea, you just want to show something, proof of concept. I think Andy, you know, did some great work with his stuff on it, you know, that kind of level, fine. But don't start hammering away code right now, because you and I both know that might be, you know, completely for nothing. And also, like, what level, right? So people are like, I'm going to improve this or that method, fair enough, but that doesn't sit in the whole global scheme of things at the moment where we're talking about how to move to .NET Core.
Okay. So, well, let me ask this question, and I don't want the question to come across the wrong way, but should we have, I guess, more DNN tag meetings until we can get insight from Microsoft? I mean, I don't want to waste those times. I mean, you know, obviously we can talk about whatever we want to, and I'm happy to schedule the meetings. But if we're kind of at a standstill until we get some kind of direction.
Well, I think it's good to keep these meetings going because it keeps the pressure on management as well. Because I know that Mitch participates in this and he's talking to Scott Hunter, and I want something out of that. So I want to keep the pressure on Mitch. I want to keep the pressure on ESW as well. Like, look, you know, we're devoting hours to this, and first, of course, we have to, as a team, get behind this 25,000 feet approach, right? And say, okay, actually, that's great. We're going to go there. That means that a whole bunch of other ideas, like Orchard, etc., are going to be parked, right? They're going to put them to the side. Like, okay, they're currently not going to be the approach. The approach is going to be like this, and help everyone begin to move that 25,000 feet slowly down to 10,000 with the help of Microsoft if they come through. But I think that can happen very quickly, by the way, that help from Microsoft.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for my part, I'm hoping that you know, we can get guidance from them sooner than later.
My understanding was they're basically waiting for the call from us. So it's a question of.
I mean, I don't know. So Mitchell has emailed the guy like a couple of times, right?
Right.
So hopefully he'll be fine.
Well, I'm gonna, you know, if there's nothing that comes out of that, I'm calling Elon at the end of the week and seeing if I can get more success there. But from everything that I understood, is not because, you know, Microsoft is not interested in our community.
Right. Gotcha. All right. Well, I know we're over time here considerably. Is there anything else you guys want to discuss before we end this one?
I'm good.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess appreciate everybody being here. I will render the video and post it into Slack and as a blog so everybody can see that we're still making progress here. And hopefully we can, you know, because I think everybody's ready to like sling some code, but they want to make sure that we're slinging it where we ought to in the right direction. Right? So
exactly.
Hopefully we can get to that point sooner than later, and we can kind of let the dogs out, so to speak. All right, guys. Well, we will see you online. Appreciate
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Bye bye.